Okay, let's get started. Ralph, thanks a lot for coming in here today. Really appreciate it. We've been working together on this project, but without you, we wouldn't be here. So I want to thank you in front of everybody.
You're welcome.
My
pleasure.
So just to make sure everybody knows, I know who you are, but what's your name?
Ralph Bishop.
Okay. And what year did you graduate Maine High School?
Class of 45.
Great. What was your address during the war?
Well, I was born in the house at 404 South Greenwood. I lived there from 1927 until 1950.
Great. Tell us about your parents and any sisters and brothers in the house.
My father, he was employed by many different companies. He worked for the post office as an auto mechanic for a while. He worked for Perkins Express Moving. That was before they had the 40-hour work week. They worked long hours. He went to work early in the morning, come home late at night. The 40-hour work week came in and gave us a little more free time. We had weekends together. After that, he went to work during the war, he went to work at Douglas Plant. He worked at Douglas Plant for quite a few years, and until it closed. And he worked for the city of Park Ridge in the water department. During the war, he had the Railroad Express contract to pick up the express and deliver it in town.
So, Ralph, what did he do at the Douglas plant? Can you remember? Do you know anything?
He worked in the outside in the area where they had different equipment that they had loaned out, like a tool shop,
tool exchange,
or equipment.
What was? Tell us a bit about when you said the Postal Express. Tell us what that is, what that was.
Many years ago, all of the deliveries came in on the railroad. The railroad had Railway Express, and my father had a brother out in Iowa, and he would always ship them in cases of eggs from Iowa, and they'd come in by rail to Park Ridge. They'd take it off the train, and our dad's contract was to take it from the train and deliver it to the people, to the addresses. And they got paid 10% of whatever the bills were, and the minimum bill was 35 cents. They only got 3.5 cents for delivery.
How about your mother?
She never worked. She was a stay-at-home mom. She baked a lot of bread, a lot of pies, did a lot of baking, did a lot of cleaning for the four of us.
Sure. And anybody else living with you?
No, that was it.
Tell us about when you were growing. Tell us about the neighborhood.
It was a neighborhood on the south side of Park Ridge there. A good neighborhood. There's only 4 of us left from the old neighborhood. All the rest of them are gone. We had Bob Peacock is still alive, lives on the south side of Park Ridge. I live on North Lincoln Avenue at Park Ridge. Don Johnson lives down in Florida, and Babe Miller, or Donald Miller, lives out in Schaumburg.
So, what was it like as far as what kinds of things did you all, the kids, do growing up? You know, when you were little, and kinds of things to do for fun.
Well,
what was it like?
We played outdoors most of the time because there was no television. There was nothing to do other than what we could do ourselves. We played a lot of baseball. We had 2 ball diamonds. One was for the big kids, like my brother and his group, and the other one was for the younger ones, like myself. We played a lot of kick the can, draw around circle, baby in a hole. Those were some of the games we played, and had a good time.
Sounds like it. So and as you know, you got a little older. Tell us about what were you like as a kid, as a teenager. I happen to know personally a few stories, but but what were you like as a teenager?
Well, I didn't date. I never dated anybody from Park Ridge. I don't know why, but I didn't. Of course, I was fortunate when my brother went into service. I had use of his car. It was a problem because it would never keep a rod in it. One or two rods would go out in it at various times. So I think I replaced 3 rods in 2 years. My dad showed me how to do it. I could do it myself.
So you were pretty mechanical.
Yeah. So we kept busy. We some of these things we did for entertainment. We went to Riverview. There was a big park down Western Avenue, Belmont.
How did you get down there?
We walked to Edison Park and got the bus in Edison Park, Ozark. It took us down the Northwest Highway to Milwaukee Avenue. We got off and got on a streetcar and took the streetcar down to Belmont, and then we took a streetcar down to Western Avenue.
Any idea how much that cost back then?
Oh, it was only pennies. Most of the time we went down to Riverview was 2-cent days, where all the rides were 2 cents. Otherwise, it was too expensive. We didn't have the money. And we went to Riverview quite often because quite a few of us worked for Downtown Shopping News, and Downtown Shopping News would have Downtown Shopping News days at Riverview, and you went down and had the rides free.
Now, how old were you when you were working for Downtown Shopping News? And tell us what was Downtown Shopping News?
Well, you couldn't go to work until you had a work permit, and you had to be 14 years old to get a work permit. So you were 14 years old. Downtown Shopping News was a newspaper that came out twice a week, come out on Wednesday and Saturday. And you got 90 cents a delivery if you delivered it yourself. If you had a helper, you had to pay the helper 45 cents or half the wages. I never had a helper. You had to walk. You weren't supposed to cut across the lawn. You had to hang, when we first started, you had to hang the fold of Shopping News up and put a rubber band on it and hang it on the door. Well, during the war, the rubber was rationed and they couldn't get rubber bands, so they did away with the rubber bands, but we were still supposed to put them on the door, and you tried to balance them on the door. And each route contained about 180 papers.
Wow. So, so you were about 14 and 15 at that time.
That's right.
So that might have been just around near when the war started.
Right.
Tell us what do you remember about? How did you hear about the beginning of the war?
It was on the radio Sunday morning, and we just couldn't believe it. Of course, we had no television then. That's before television. The only news or pictures you got, you had to go to the theater and see the weekly newsreel. And you'd see all the war pictures and war stuff at the theater or in the newspaper.
What was your? Do you remember what were people saying when we heard when the attack on Pearl Harbor happened? What was the talk about? Your family and friends. What were people saying back then?
Well, the biggest thing was rationing came in, and the young folks had to sign up for the draft, and like my brother was drafted in '42, shortly after the war. He served over in New Guinea. I think he got 5 battle stars over there. He was lucky he come back. He wasn't wounded.
Did you hear from him during the war?
Oh yeah. He wrote quite often as he could. He never said much about what was going on over there, although he did say that when they got some gasoline, 55-gallon drums, they would put them on the ground and they'd sink in the ground. They put another one in a sink and then put another one. He said he didn't know how many were down underground.
Mm-hmm.
And made some rings, 2 rings. I got one for myself, and he made one for himself. And they were made out of a Japanese airplane aluminum propeller with a stone in it that he made over there. He made several things over there. They made took a base of a artillery shell, and he put 50 caliber, I think it was, and then he made a P-38 out of bullet casings. And it's a beautiful piece of workmanship. And then he had foreign coins around soldered on around the base. I've got it at home. It's a beautiful piece.
Well, that's great. So when the war started, how did your family, like, what kinds of things impacted your family right away? Did your dad, what things do you remember as like a kid changing your family?
Well, one of the first things was my dad had an old 1928 LaSalle, and it had side mounts, which on the right behind the front wheel, one on each side. So it had 6 tires, and the government come along and said you could only have 5 tires, and you had to turn the 5th one in, or the 6th one in, or if you had more, you had to turn them in for the rubber drive. Well, he had quite a few old tires because what he had on it was old truck tires from Perkins Express that were bald, and in those days it was a casing and an inner tube, and if you got a nail in it, you had to take the tire apart and patch the inner tube and put it back together again. Well, these tires had holes in them, and we had boots in them at that time. We didn't have money to buy new tires. We had big boots, a thing that's made out of like a tire casing, and it's glued inside, so the inner tube wouldn't go out and get pinched. Well, my dad had to get rid of all of the tires other than those 5, and they were truck tires. They were 8-ply. They didn't have any tread on them, but they were 8-ply. And we had a lot of flat tires.
I bet. So how about how about your family as far as food or gasoline rationing? How was?
Well, gasoline rationing. My dad had an A's card, which was very limited gasoline.
Yeah, tell everybody about what are the different cards and what do they mean?
They had an A card, which anybody with an automobile got. A B was if you worked in a defense plant or something of emergency nature, and C was a commercial. Now, my dad had an A. I eventually got a B because I worked in a defense plant. And the fire department was volunteer at that time, and the fire department got extra gasoline to give to the volunteer firemen so they could go to the fire.
So tell us, since you mentioned you worked at a defense plant, what was the defense plant? Where was it?
The defense plant was in Park Ridge on Meacham Avenue, the old Bussey Buick garage. Originally, it was Bussey Buick garage, and it was a big garage, and during the war, they divided it into half. And one half was the defense plant, and the other half was auto repair. You got to realize there were no new automobiles built for civilian use after 1941, after the war. So the dealerships only had repair work. They had no new cars. They could sell used cars if somebody traded one in. The other side was the defense plant. They packed tools for the Signal Corps and the Navy. They got in, they had 3 or 4 different types of tool kits that they made. One was a canvas bag with a lot of tools in it. Another one was like a foot locker. It was about 18 inches deep. No, it's about a foot deep, 18 inches wide, and about 2 foot long, and there were all kinds of tools in there for the Signal Corps. Screwdrivers, pliers, wire cutters, soldering irons, you name it, and different sizes. Well, these toolboxes would come in, crated, we uncrate them.
And where would they come in from? So, because how did they ship them to?
They shipped them, those came in by truck.
Okay.
and we unloaded them. We uncrated them. We packed them with tools, and then we recrated them, labeled where they were going, sent them back out. The big ones stood about 3 foot high, about 2 foot wide, and about 14 inches deep. And it was in 2 sections. There was the bottom section was the drawers and like a little workbench. There was a vise on it, and there was different things on it for working on wires. And the top part would take them off, turn it over, and the bottom part would sit on the top part, so you had like a bench.
Mm-hmm.
Now these weighed 350 pounds, 320 pounds when they were loaded. Well, the high school kids, we shipped. They came in empty. We uncrated them, packed them, recrated them, and then we had the job of loading them. Now this was a job because we loaded them into railroad freight cars on the siding by the Heinz Lumber Company. Mr. Breedeman, Sr., up at Breedeman's Chevrolet, I met him there. That was Mr. Breedeman Sr.'s oldest son. He was called Junior, but now he doesn't want to be called Junior. He wants to be called Senior. So I knew him real well. But he had health problems, and he couldn't load the stuff on it. We came out running out of the building, down across the ramp and up the ramp, and you sure didn't want to miss the ramp, which we did often. We got them jammed between the ramp and the building, or the ramp and the railroad car. Well, then 2 or 3 guys had to go out there and help get it off, back up and get it in. The other problem, when we got them up in there, you always wanted to be the first one in there, so you put it on the first level. They went 3 high. Many times you come in there, and you had to take them up to the second one, up to the third one. So these were all high school kids loading all these.
Wow. So tell us about, in addition to gasoline being rationed, and then you got a B card, how about food?
Food was rationed. There was meat rationing. There was grease rationing. You got ration stamps for meat. You got ration stamps for gasoline. You had ration stamps for shoes.
How many pairs? I mean, shoes. How often?
Well, they were pretty rare. You really had to be worn out to get a new pair of shoes. You didn't just go get a new pair of shoes.
So, how did your mom cope with the food rationing? What kinds of things did your family do to deal with that?
Well, my dad had 2 gardens. He had a garden on our house, property on Greenwood, and then across the street there were 2 vacant lots. The 2 lots north of Stewart on the east side of the street. The first 2 lots, 50-foot lot. That was our ball field. And then when the war came along, my dad decided he was going to have a victory garden over there. So the victory garden was about 100 feet this way and about 100 feet that way. And he had got a rototiller, I think it was from the Park District, to rototill it. And we raised beets, carrots, parsley, lettuce, onions, some corn. And I think that was about it. And of course, all these were good for vegetable soup. So my wife and my mother would get meat ration, and she could get the small roast, put it in there, make a stew or make a pot roast. So a lot of victory gardens all around.
So there was a lot of victory gardens in Park Ridge.
Oh yeah.
In other public spaces and things like that.
Yeah.
Or?
Yeah. Most vacant property was turned into a victory garden by somebody.
Oh, okay. Now, how about you personally, Ralph? Did you go ahead and help get? Did you do? I understand that you did some little hunting.
Yeah, well, the other thing was for meat. We used to do a lot of hunting. West of Western Avenue was outside the city limits. I don't know whether you know about the Washington School. You know where the Washington School is? I got my first pheasant right about where the principal's office is of the Washington School. And pheasant was luxury. It was meat during the war. And I got a rabbit out there just west of Western Avenue. My mother cooked it, but she didn't know how to cook rabbit. It wasn't very good. I never shot rabbit unless somebody wanted a rabbit. There were a lot of them. Their mothers knew how to fix Hausenpfeffer, and that I understand it was delicious, but you can't fry rabbit like you can squirrel or anything else.
Did you get squirrels too?
Oh yeah, we got squirrels. There were about 5. Dave Group, Don Johnson, Ernie Rizza, myself, Jimmy Trecker. And we were hunting all the area west of Western Avenue to D Road up to the cemetery, and then from Touhy Avenue to Telcott in there. And we were hunting squirrels.
Was that just all woods, or what was
That
it?
was wood. Everything from Western Avenue to about Home Avenue was a prairie. They started the subdivision, and the sidewalks were in out there, but there was no streets. And the Depression came, and it stood that way until after the war.
One thing I wanted to, sorry to get back a little earlier. How was your family? I mean, the war started just at the end of the Depression. What was life like? Was your family affected by the Depression?
Oh yes. The only reason my folks Dad saved the house was because Mr. Roloff, a local hardware man, had the mortgage, and Mr. Roloff said he didn't want the house, to just pay the interest. If all he could do was pay the interest. Well, talking to Jimmy Trecker, that's his father, was the same way. The only way they saved the old homestead was they paid the interest, and the houses didn't get paid off until after the war started, because when the war came, you made money, and there was no way to spend it. You couldn't buy cars, you couldn't buy refrigerators, you couldn't go on vacations. Everything was so limited on your buying power. You couldn't buy a lot of food you liked. You couldn't buy expensive food because you couldn't buy it. They didn't have it. And so they really made quite a bit of money, and they were able to pay off their mortgages. And it wasn't until after the war started these houses got paid off.
So getting back to high school when the war started. So going to school, how old were you in 41? So you were about 14? Okay. And what was, how did that change high school? Like, what things were different in high school?
Well, of course, I started in high school in 41. I graduated from Lincoln School in 41, and then I went into high school the fall of 41. And how did it affect us? It affected us because you were limited on your transportation to school. A lot of kids couldn't drive their cars. They didn't have enough gas to drive cars, so you had to take the buses. That was the main way to get to school.
Right. And they had, now, I understand there had civil defense programs or things like that in school, and they had different training. Do you remember any of that or hear about any?
Oh yeah, there was all kinds of civil defense. There was volunteer firemen, there were volunteer policemen, there were air raid wardens, there's airplane observers, and they learned the different images of the airplane. There was all different branches of the fire department. There was the rescue units and the civil defense rescue units, civil defense fire units, civil defense first aid units. And
now, could you do any of that as a teenager? Or?
Oh yeah, some of them did that as a teenager, yeah.
Sure. And did you have, I don't know, was there any blackouts? Did you have to black?
They had blackouts here. They had one or two actual practice bombings. They made paper bombs and dropped paper bombs, and then they wanted people to find them and turn them in, and they had them in different colors for like incendiary bombs or different type bombs.
Did you find it or know anybody?
I never found anybody. I know people that found them.
Now tell us about the blackout. What did you guys have to do for that?
Well, you had dark shades, and you pulled the shades down. They didn't want any light, so if a aircraft came over, they didn't know where anything was. And of course, one of the things was that early aviation, everything, they didn't have a lot of the equipment they have today, so it was all visual. They went by a water tower, or they went by the river, or certain landmarks is how they determined what
Sure.
was what.
Right. Now tell us about like what kinds of things did you or your friends, how did the war affect that as far as did any of them get as far as jobs or any things they did anything differently or?
Oh yeah, almost all of the people eventually got into a defense plant of some sort. We had 2 defense plants in Park Ridge, but Bussey Buick and American Totalizer.
What was the American Totalizer?
They were over at Touhy Avenue on Main Street. I don't know exactly what they made. Some sort of electronical stuff. But they had quite a crew over there. And then, of course, Des Plaines had quite a few defense plants. I worked in one over there, which was a Dual company. I worked there for during the war also. And one of the things was when you worked at a lot of those defense plants, you had a hard time getting off.
Really? So that affected school then?
Well, it affected a lot of the things you would do. I didn't participate in any sports. I got into the defense plant at Breedemans. I was scheduled to, I did play a little softball, or I was on a team, I should say. I think I only played 1 game. I was supposed to play 1 game one night, and Mr. Breedeman said, we can't do it. We've got to have this boxcar loaded by tomorrow morning. It's got to go out of here. So it was a hot summer day. The sun had beat on that boxcar all day long. It must have been 150 in that boxcar, and we were loading that boxcar. And it got loaded and shipped out the next day.
Do you want a water break there, Ralph?
Please.
Yeah.
It's such a loud noise.
You had the what, Ralph?
We had the big bands. We had the good music. We had the good songs. We only had 2 goofy songs.
What were those?
Mersey Dotes and 3 Little Fishies.
How did those go? Do you remember how those songs went?
Oh, I know part of it. Mersey Dotes, Dozy Dotes, Little Lambsy Divey, Tiddly Divey Doo, too, wouldn't you? That's what I remember that one. 3 little fishies, mama fish do, 3 little fishies, and mama fish do. Swim, fishy, swim, something that way.
Did you guys go to? Did you guys have a lot of dances you went to?
My mother never allowed us to dance. She was belonged to St. Andrew's Church, and they didn't believe in dancing, so we didn't dance.
So that leads me into, were you able to date at all?
Oh yeah, I dated her. Like I say, I didn't date anybody from high school. Edison Park, I had a lot of girls from Edison Park.
Where did you meet the girls, and what did you guys do for dates?
Oh, mostly it was the movies there. Then, of course, when I had the car, we go up to Bangs Lake, up to the beaches. That was a big thing. We went up there a lot of weekends. And Riverview, and just hang out in the movies. And
did a lot of your friends date too, or?
I dated a lot. We had double dated a lot of times.
Did you?
One of the. I probably shouldn't tell.
No, absolutely. You should tell us. Go ahead.
Well, I told you about the Model T Spark Club.
I don't. What was that? Now, tell me, how did that work? Now, you were driving what kind of car were you driving?
33 Graham.
Okay. And then what was the spark coil?
It was a Model T Spark Coil. It was mounted underneath the front seat. And one wire went into the coil. One wire went from the coil to the car frame, and the other one went from the coil to wire and a brass piece of metal that drug on the ground.
Oh, okay.
Well, I knew this was supposed to work. And when I was making it, it was wet, and I would go in the basement and solder, and I would come back and put it in. Well, luckily, I opened the opposite side of the driver's side. The switch was on the driver's side, and it was a knife switch, one that you come down, it's on and on. So I turned it on with a stick. Or no, I sat in the car and I turned it on, and I was afraid I'd get jolted. I made sure I didn't touch the gear shift or anything, and I turned it on and I didn't get a jolt, and I felt, oh boy, this is good. So then I decided, well, I got to see if it works. So I reached in and turned it on with the stick, and I touched the car chrome bumper. It knocked me across the garage. My feet were wet.
So did you test it out on anybody then, Ralph? Like, were you driving around? What was
Oh, yeah.
what was that one time you were telling me about?
Well, the first time was I went down to see Fred Hallberg. Fred lived at Prairie Avenue with Huey. It was a nice summer evening. The grass was nice and damp, and Fred come running out and grabbed on that chrome door handle, and I hear him, yow!
Now, I happen to know that you were also, you had another very cool thing that you had in case you wanted to make a getaway. What did you do? What else did you do on?
I had a smoke screen on the car.
And now, how did that work?
There was a kerosene tank, square tank about that long, about that wide, and about that deep. It just fit under the seat, and it could be pulled out and filled. And then there was a pipe and a hose leading to the intake manifold on the car. But there's a valve there. And when you turned the valve on, it would suck the kerosene in, and it would just make a big cloud of smoke. I mean a big cloud of smoke. Well, I had more fun with that than you could shake a stick at numerous times. So the one I told,
What was that one on Dempster Street
Yeah.
that happened?
I went to high school one day, and I told Hank Lagerhausen from Des Plaines, I said, I put something on my car. And he said, what's that? I said, I put a smoke screen on. He said, how's that work? I said, I'll show you. So I reached down and I turned it on, and the parking lot at the high school was getting all smoked up. And I had Bob Peacock and Don Johnson rode with me to school. I said, turn it off. Well, it was on here. One of them swings it over to here, and he says, it's off. And I'm driving out the out the driveway on the south side of the school, and I'm looking in the mirror. Oh, my God, you shut it off? And he said, yeah. And I said, it can't be shut off. So the other fellow says, he reached down, he did the same thing, turned it over the other way. He didn't turn to the off position. I get out on Dempster Street, I go north on Dempster Street, and I stop, and I said, I got to find out, I got to go disconnect this thing. I don't know what happened to it. So I got out of the car, and I couldn't see the car. And then it dawned on me, they must not have shut it off. So I reached in, and I could see in there. I reached in, and I shut it off. Got back in the car, closed the car door. I could see out this side, but that side I couldn't see. The smoke was going around. Well, I could make a right turn because I could see that. School bus was going west on Dempster Street. He had to stop to wait for this cloud of smoke to disappear. Come back to school. A couple of kids said, what happened to your car? I said, it burned up. And he said, you lying son of a gun. Because they saw the car out of the front.
Yeah, sure. Oh, so you learned more than arithmetic at school then.
Oh, yeah. We had fun. You can't have fun today. We lived in the best school. Because what we did, you can't do today.
No. Any other off-the-record kind of things that you guys had fun with?
Well, one of the worst stories about this coil was Fred Perlberg, I told you, he was the first guy who got with this. Well, we double dated. We double dated in this coupe. And we took the gal he was with home, and then he was driving, and he took the gal I was going with home. And he went to get me. He turned on the Model T spike coil. And Doris was 1 foot on the running board and 1 foot in a puddle of water. Did she go down?
Oh, that's not good for dating.
But we had that coil. He tried to get me numerous times when he was driving. I let him drive it. He did get me once. He got me once good.
So you had, getting back to working, so you had plenty of money when you were dating back then.
Well, not plenty of money, but we got 90 cents delivery when we were working for the shopping news, and I paid my bus fare and or my car expenses. I paid all my books. I paid a lot of my clothing.
And how much were you paid when you were at the defense plant? Do you remember how much they paid?
I think it was 35, 40 cents an hour. It wasn't much.
Right. Do you, when the war came on and, your brother was serving in the war, I mean, what was your feelings about the war at the time? Like,
well, you had mixed feelings. Of course, you hated the Japs and you hated the Germans for the uprising in the country. Now, we did have a German prisoner of war camp up in Des Plaines. There was an old CCC camp up at Euclid Avenue and the river. And it was a CCC camp, and then it was I think it was a Boy Scout camp. And then during the war, I think it was, I know it was a PW prisoner of war camp. And then I talked to a person recently in the Des Plaines Historical Society when I was up there, and she said she went there as a Girl Scout. It was a Girl Scout camp, and I think it must have been, from what I determined, I think the Girl Scout camp was the last one.
mm-hmm.
And there still remains of the foundations up there, I understand. I haven't been back in there, but I understand there's still.
Did you have any run-ins with, or did you see the place during the war, or see any of the prisoners at all?
No, I didn't. It was pretty quiet that there was a prisoner of war camp up there, but the prisoners worked for Pesce Flowers. Not too long ago, one of the prisoners of war, German prisoners of war, and his family came back here to visit Frank Pesce. Frank Pesce was in my class for the 50th anniversary, and he came back and visited and stayed with Frank. Now, I don't know, Frank is no longer working at the Pesce store, and I don't know, I haven't been able to contact him, or I don't know how up he is, but he knew all and his dad was German, and he had the prisoners of war. They loved it working for him because they invited him to eat with them and stuff like that.
Great. So during school, I understand they had assemblies whenever there was a casualty, when somebody who was a student died.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember those?
I remember one of them especially. It was Paul Fleissner. His sister went to grammar school from I think first grade all the way through high school with me, and Paul was 1 or 2 years ahead of us, and he was killed in the war.
What do you remember? What do you remember about that? How did you feel about that?
Well, of course, I had played some ball. I wasn't too much in playing ball with Paul because they lived north of Touhy Avenue, and for quite a few years we were never allowed to go across Touhy Avenue. Touhy Avenue was too dangerous to cross. So, but I did play with Paul, and it was hard to take that somebody you knew passed away or was killed that early.
Yeah. Did you have any other friends or anybody you knew that was close to you that died in the war?
No, they can't say other than Paul, that I really knew.
How about other families? Like, did you have any friends who had families who lost folks in the war, that other friends or anything like that?
Well, there were a lot of people. There were several people in town. I didn't know them or their sons that were killed, but they were older. Naturally, they, like my brother's 8 or older.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't know them.
So later on in the war, then when they had the Douglas plant, which you said your dad worked at, they did have the war bond drive.
Well, their war bonds were a big thing. Then, of course, the principal at Maine, the only Maine, he challenged the class of 45 to raise $300,000 to buy a Douglas C-54 that was built out at O'Hare Field, which is now O'Hare Field. So the 4 classes, class of 45, 46, 47, and 48, set out to accomplish this. We accomplished it in, I think it was 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, with a very short period of time. We raised over $550,000, and they bought this C-54, Douglas C-54. If you raised over $400,000, you could have the plane named after you. Well, we had raised over $400,000, so they named the plane, and it was Maine Flyer Flies Higher. And we had many. The class of 45 had quite a few class reunions. We didn't have any reunion until our 20th. That was our first one. After that, we had one every 5 years. One fella in the class, he said that he flew on the plane at one time. The plane was a hospital plane during the Korean War. The plane eventually got bought up by a private party, and I understand it was used as a plane for force firefighting. And the Historical Society has found the plane out in Arizona on an abandoned airfield on an Indian reservation. It's in pieces. There's no tail section from what I understand. I understand they got some parts off of it put into the museum. And it was quite a feat to find this, and the class of 45 is happy they found it.
Yeah, that's exactly correct. And so on the bonds, did you sell stamps and bonds? Do you remember any selling them?
They sold both stamps and bonds. Now, I didn't personally sell any bonds because I was working in the defense plants, and these defense plants wouldn't let you offer a lot of this stuff.
What was your schedule during the day? So, like, when did you go to school and when did you go to work?
Well, we went to school at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I think I had punch in when I worked at. I got home, changed clothes, and went to work for Breedeman, Bussy Breedeman, when I was working at that defense plant. When I worked, after I got out of there, I went to work for Condor Saw, and I went right from school to work, and then I worked till about 7 o'clock at night.
Do you remember? I think, didn't you get out early, or what time? What time did you get out of school then?
Well, I got out a little earlier because of my classes. I had one less class, so I wasn't a good student.
Well, you graduated, so right? Okay, that's all we need to know.
Well, I wanted to plan I planned my senior year. I had gym, wood shop 2, metal shop 3, a mechanical drawing 1, and yeah, that was it.
Well, I can see then it makes sense what your jobs that you were doing at the second place that you were working at in Des Plaines. What was it?
Condor Saw.
Right. And what were you doing there?
Well, we worked on a rewind and recoil. They made these saws, band saws, and they were a long strip of steel with teeth on it, and they would come out in coils of 200, 300, 400, 500 feet of metal. and with teeth on them. And when they come off of the first project where the band went through and they cut all the teeth on it, then they went out and they turned around and they send them through a heat treat to heat treat the steel and temper the blades only, the tips, the teeth. And we had to return put them into the boxes to send them out. They had to be recoiled to reverse them, and then they put them in boxes. So I worked on the recoiling.
Right.
And the interesting thing is, Condor saw during the war, they stopped production, and at times they had a person come through, and you had to take vitamins. They had vitamins, and they gave you vitamins, and they stopped there. They gave you a vitamin, and they watched to see that you ate them.
Really? What was the point? Did they say why you needed to take these vitamins?
I guess it was just to keep the stamina up for the constant workload.
Wow. Wow. I think that's a little different than today.
Oh, yeah.
So now that was near the end of the war. What was your thoughts like in 1945? When did you hear about what was the end of the war in Europe?
Well, the end of the war, I just talked to Don Johnson down in Florida a couple of weeks ago. I said, what was it, June the 6th when it ended, June 7th, whatever it was. And I called him up and said, do you remember where we were 60-some years ago? No, where? I says, we got out of school, the war was over. I says, we got in my Graham, we had your dad's gas outboard motor, and I said, we went up to Lake Wakanda to go fishing. I said, we got up to Lake Wakanda and we couldn't rent a boat. They stopped renting boats, the taverns closed, or that tavern was closed, they stopped renting boats. But the guy in the tavern, he said, I won't rent you a boat, but he said, I'll tell you, you take the boat and you go out and go fishing. So we got out, it was a cold day. We got out there and we were fishing, and there was no fishing, we were fighting. And all of a sudden, somebody from somewhere released one of this guy's boats. And it was floating across the lake. Well, we went out and we got the boat, and we were going to haul it back to shore. We ran out of gasoline probably 200 feet from shore. And I said, well, I'll row us in. And I started rowing, and I'm rowing, and I'm rowing, and we're losing ground. So Don got on one oar, and I got on the other, and we pulled like the devil. And we finally got into shore with both boats. Never forget that day.
I bet. And how did you hear about that? Was it on the radio, or how did the word come down? Was it the newspaper?
Yeah, it was mostly radio. That's the only way, or radio or word of mouth.
Right.
Because no television. Like newspapers. Newspapers then, the news didn't come over the across the Atlantic to the news offices for sometimes hours or days. So when you got some news, it might be 4 or 5 days old. It wasn't like it is today. Television, they show you the picture of what's going on.
Right, right. And so during that summer, and then did you expect the war to go on longer than it did?
No, not really. No.
Do you remember when VJ Day happened?
Oh, yeah.
What was going on then?
Well, of course, that was quite a celebration. That was quite a celebration because the war was over, and people didn't think they'd get drafted yet, or wouldn't get drafted, but they still got drafted, and they still went into service for a while as replacements for the ones coming home. And
do you remember where you were, or anything about VJ Day itself, or anything?
Not really.
What was the atmosphere like? So the atmosphere like after the war was over? It's like, did rationing? Well,
of course, you got to realize that after the war was over, you don't automatically convert everything right now to making refrigerators or stoves or cars or anything. It was quite a while before the cars. When I come out of service, I bought a 1939 Chevy. It was a fairly new car when you figure in car years, because there wasn't anything made for public use since 1941.
Right.
And I had over 70,000 miles on it when I bought it.
What year did you go in the service?
1945.
Like when in 40?
I went in after I went in to enlist. My brother wrote from New Guinea and told me, he says, don't go in and enlist in the Navy. He says, don't go in wait to go into the Army and get in this mud hole like this. So I went in May of 45 to enlist in the Navy and went down on Plymouth Court and took the physical, and I didn't pass for some reason. I don't know what the reason was, but I didn't make it, and then I come home and I waited for the draft, and the draft called me in October of 45.
Okay, all right. And then, what was your life? So you went in and late 45. Looking back, like during your teenager years during the war, what would you want to make sure that kids today know about?
Well, what the problems were during the war, the hardships, broken families. Now, a lot of my friends, my cousin Don Miller and a good friend of mine, Bill Arnsfeld, they enlisted in the Merchant Marine. My folks didn't want me to enlist. They wanted me to finish school. So I didn't get to enlist, but there were a lot of my class that enlisted before they graduated.
Did they?
Several of them. Johnny Nicholas, I think he was a captain in the Navy, and he flew off aircraft carriers. And there was a lot of them that were.
What age were people? Were they joining up in 17 or?
Well, most of them were, the ones that I knew were just before they were graduating, like the early part of 45.
I see.
January, February of 45.
Is there anything else like that, that you think that we should know, or that we didn't, that people don't appreciate?
Well, the training and stuff, and the volunteer time of all of the people that during the war doing their various chores, training as civil defense personnel, volunteer firemen, policemen, air raid wardens, the ones watching the airplane watchers. It was all time consuming. It was all volunteer time, and they were doing that while they were trying to do everything for the war effort. One of the reasons that somebody couldn't believe that they raised, the class of 45 raised that $550,000 in that short period of time, they couldn't believe how they could raise it. And I told them, I said, well, there's only one reason they raised it that way. And he said, how's that? And I said, that's because you couldn't buy a car, you couldn't buy a refrigerator, you couldn't buy anything. You couldn't buy guns, you couldn't buy ammunition. So the people had money, and that's they bought the war bonds from a lot. And then people were working overtime. There was a lot of overtime during the war. Mm-hmm. And that I contribute to being able to raise that kind of money in that short period of time with the people that couldn't spend any. So
they were able to buy war bonds.
now when you bought war bonds, you could buy a 1875, I think it was, war bond, and it'd pay you $25 after 10 years. Or you could buy the $50 war bond for $37.50, I think it was. And in children in school, they would buy saving stamps, 25-cent saving stamps, and put them in a book. And when you got the 1875 or the $37.50, you could turn it into a war bond. I have someplace, I must have it, because I can remember when I delivered with my dad on Railway Express, I had a cap like a truck driver, and I had a little rosette that was made out of war bond stamps. saving stamps, and I had that on the front of my cap, and it's there. It's got to be there someplace. I don't know where, but it's
Well, if you do find it, we would certainly appreciate it, taking a look at it. Ralph, I just want to thank you very much for coming in and talking to us. I think it's going to make a big difference that your memories are going to be preserved forever now, so that other generations can appreciate what you experienced and went through.
Well, thank you and welcome.
You're welcome. Great. Thanks a lot.
By one of the gals in the class of 45 at almost all of our reunions, she was Greta Honey. She passed on, but she always talked about her experience with selling war bonds. She says it was a cold night. She says we had skirts on and we had our saddle shoes on, and the snow was about knee deep, and she says it was cold out there, and they were knocking on doors.
And I guess they got it done. Great. All righty. Anything else?
Just a technical question. I was curious about that instance you mentioned on repairing your dad's car, the rods that you replaced. I assume you're talking about piston rods?
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Well, yeah, I repaired. That was, you always hoped it was, I think it was number 1 and number 6 cylinder. You were hoping that those were the rods that went. Because those rods, you didn't have to pull the head off. You could pull a piston out from the bottom, send it out, and have the rod rebabbited and put it in.
Okay.
Hold on. Let's go ahead. Go ahead.
Question about the classes. You mentioned that you had 4 classes in your senior year. Was there like a class requirement?
There was a class requirement. I had my 3 years of English. I had my year of history. I had a year of general science. I had a year of biology. Like I say, 3 years of English, and I had my requirements.
So with the people who left or went to volunteer, did they have their requirements, or did some of them just decide to leave high school?
A lot of them left the high school to enlist in the Air Force or the Navy. A lot of them, and then they went back and they finished up, or they took their high school test, equivalency test, and got their diploma that way.
Okay.
Good question. Because there were a lot of them that left high school to go into the service.
I'm just surprised at the 1 year of history, because now I have to take 4.
It happened in the machine shop. We were fortunate, we got some brand new metal lathes in the machine shop, and they got a brand new milling machine in the machine shop, but we never got to run the milling machine. We never got any mill cutters, so the milling machine sat there for 4 years and we never used it. And another thing was, in wood shop we couldn't get good wood. My buddy in Des Plaines, he must have had been a pet of the wood shop teacher, Mr. Roberts, because he got cherry wood and he made a beautiful desk and a beautiful bench, and he still got it today, and he's never re-glued it. I made a bed and chest of drawers, a gun rack, and they were all made out of pine. Pine wasn't an expensive wood, and it wasn't hard to find. And almost all the projects were made out of pine. Some fellas, they were pets of the Mr. Roberts, and they got some walnut and they got some oak, and I wasn't a pet. I got pine.
All right. Great. Okay. I think we're right at the